I thought it would be interesting to speak about something which I have noticed, which most people are unfamiliar with, especially in light of what's happening today, which is current events, something which I find to be fascinating, which has a history, and that is to tell you a series of events or a series of stories. Now, I usually don't say stories. I'm not a story individual. I usually deal with facts, ideas, concepts, and try to explain the divine plan itself, So it's not so much a story, it's an interpretation of events and how they fit and so on, how they illustrate and demonstrate the divine plan itself. So I wanted to tell you in many ways the story of, if you want to call it that, what I think is happening at a certain mystical level. So really, I'm going to tell you a series of mystical events that are happening that basically are unbeknownst to most people. And one of the reasons that I'm aware of this is that in a certain sense, as you will see, part of the ideas or part of the events that is happening is autobiographical, which means that I was involved in some of the aspects of these events and so on. In any case, so let me begin to unfold these ideas, and you will see that in certain ways they reveal certain things going on, which clearly can be tied to today, especially as I will show you with the inauguration of Donald Trump, and so on, as you will see. In any case, before I begin, this year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshai ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, ben Tzvi Hirsch, Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf, Shmuel Ruvain ben Regina, and so on. And they should all have schus for the Shiur. And also Esther Libo Bas Chaya Yafa should have a complete refuah shlema. And Shlomo Leib Ben Fega. Yes. In any case, the first story, in a certain sense, goes back before World War II, actually, and so on. I think it happened in 1938. So it's an important idea. Rav Chanan Wasserman, who's one of the Gedolim in pre-war Europe. In fact, he's probably the greatest Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim. Very famous person. He had a yeshiva in Baranovich, and he was once in London. I think this goes back to 1938. And he was in London, and he was in a shul. I think the name of the shul was Machzike Hadas. And obviously there were storm clouds gathering already in Europe in 1938. So they begged him not to go back to Europe itself. He was in London. So he told them he refused. He didn't want to be apart from his Talmidim, who were in, as far as I know, in Baranovich. I think it was in Europe and so on, obviously. So he told them, let me tell you something that the Chofetz Chaim said. Okay? And he told them a remarkable it was almost a nevuah in terms of what the Chofetz Chaim said. Now, the Chofetz Chaim had already been nifta in 1933, and this was 1938. And he said that this was right after World War I, which I think ended in 1917. So the Chofetz Chaim told Rabbi Chonon Wasserman that the war that just passed, World War I, really is part of the war of Gog and Magog, right? This wasn't just an average war. This was a world war. And what a world war means is that it has the status of the war of Gog and Magog. And that's really what it was. And that's one of the reasons why it created so much tremendous destruction of Jewish towns and synagogues and villages, enormous disruption of Jewish life. So he said that World War I was really the first part of Gog and Magog. That's what the Chofetz Chaim said. Okay. Then the Chofetz Chaim said that, and this was, remember, and I think this statement was made by the Chofetz Chaim in 1917, or right after World War I. So there was no one that he could have known. But it's almost like he prophetically said that there will be another world war, okay? And that will be the second part of Gog and Magog, right? So he said that there will be another, as I said, world war, and that would be Gog and Magog again, but it will be part 2. And then he said, which would be coming up, which of course happened, what was about, 17, 27, 37, obviously over 20 years later, that was World War II, which the Chofetz Chaim predicted. And then the Chofetz Chaim said that the war of Gog and Magog, there will be a third part. And he didn't say when that would be, okay? There would be a third part, right? And that would be the war of Gog and Magog, and that will be the last one. That was a tremendous prophetic insight, obviously, that he had. Now, it makes sense, looking at it from hindsight, that this truly was, the Second World War was truly the war of Gog and Magog. Because essentially what that war was, it was a war of Hitler, Germany, the Nazis, Amalek, that's really who they are, against the Jewish people. That's really what the war was, and so on. The major impetus of the entire German people wasn't just the Nazis, it was the German people, was to destroy the Jewish people. And that was part of Gog and Magog. In fact, that's really in many ways what fulfilled the major brunt of the war of Gog and Magog. And that is why the third war, whatever that is, which he did not say when, there will be a confrontation against the Jews, but it will not have the brutality, the savagery of the war of Gog and Magog. In any case, that's what the Chofetz Chaim said. You see. Now, he didn't say when that would be, but he did say there will be a third part to the war of Gog and Magog. Now, I've already said, I've indicated my feeling is that that Obama is Gog, and that the United Nations is the war against the Jewish people. And they of course are the entire world, because the UN represents, it was about, I think, 193 nations, and they clearly hate the Jews. I mean, their duplicity is unbelievable, the double standard and so on. But in any case, and the threat of the UN obviously is not the same as a military threat, but there's no question that it leads to tremendous rise in anti-Semitism. But I'm not going to go into that. In any case, this is what the Chofetz Chaim said. So we begin to understand something, at least what World War II really was. It was a messianic war of Gog from the land of Magog, which is Germany, against the Jewish people, and of course it fulfilled that brutality, of course, in many ways. But that's the first idea that I wanted to talk about, the first event and so on, you know. Second idea that you have to understand, you know, we know that there are three parts, or I should say that the soul of a person, of a Jew, has 5 parts. We know that. It's called Neiron Chai, from the words Neiron Chai, which is the first nun is Nefesh, okay? Then you have, which is the soul. You have Ruach, which is a spirit. Then you have a third part called the Neshama, which is an individual part besides the collective term of the soul. You have Chai, Ches, which is the Chaya, and Yechida. Now the Nefesh is a spiritual soul, obviously, and it resides in some way in the liver. The Ruach resides in the heart. The Neshama, or the individual part called the Neshama, resides in the brain. Those are the 3 components, the major components, obviously. In some way, they're all connected in some fashion to the physical body. Then you have what's called a Chaya, which is a part of the Neshama, a 4th part, that surrounds the body. And it's not connected to any single organ, but it is connected to the body almost like an aura that surrounds the entire body. And then you have what's called Yechida. Yechida means the unique one, and so on. And the Yechida is not connected in any which way to the body. And the reason why it's called Yechida, because it is the Yechida, which is the highest part of the soul, that is connected to the Shekhinah, to the divine presence. And that's why it's called Yechida, because it is connected to the single part that which is Einod Mavadoi, that's God. And that is not, like I say, connected to any part of the body, but it is that which is connected to the Ein Sof. So you have those 5 parts of the Neshama, and every Jew has those 5 parts. So that's the first thing which is very important. Second thing which is very important that you have to know, and that is that Adam Harishon, the first man, when he sinned, we know he sinned, and he ate from the tree of good and evil, which he should not have done, he contaminated by going against the will of God. He contaminated every part of his neshama, all the parts of the neshama, except for one, which is interesting. What part was that? That right before he tasted that fruit, whatever it was, right? Then his yechida, his part called yechida, which connected him, Adam Harishon, to the Rabbi Shalom, right? Connected him to the Rabbi Shalom. It flew off his neshama. It disconnected from his neshama, and before he could take a bite into whatever the fruit was, it flew away. It's incredible. So as such, the Yechida of Adam Harishon, okay, disconnected itself, as I said, and is the only aspect of man, the first man, okay, that was never contaminated by the sin of Adam Harishon. So it is pure. Now what is important to understand is Adam Harishon, before he was divided into all the souls of mankind, okay, that Adam Harishon's Yechida really is the collective neshama of every human being, because he was the only person. Then later on, his neshama was split into the millions of people. And all of us are really sparks of the neshama of Adam Harishim. So the Yechid of Adam Harishim is pure, no tumah, no defilement, right? But that disattached, as I said, you know. So we really all have the part of Adam Harishim that is contaminated. And part of what we have to do, of course, is to atone, right? To remove that defilement that he initiated by eating from the tree. In any case. So that's the second thing you have to understand. That the Yechid of Adam Harishon, okay, which is the collective Yechidah of all humanity, you know, certainly of all the Jews and so on, right, is pure, never contaminated. The third part you have to understand, which is very important, is the makeup of the Mashiach. Who is this person? Not so much who is he in terms of identity, but who is he in terms of the makeup of his neshama, his soul. And the answer to that is very interesting. What happened is that there are different parts to the soul of Adam Harishim. Okay. Now, there is an aspect to the neshama of the Mashiach, obviously, that is incredibly high, very sublime, and so on. So what happened is the Yechidah of Adam Harishon, which I said was never contaminated, split into two. One, there is what's called a shirish of the Mashiach ben Yosef. Without going into why there's a Mashiach ben Yosef, but there's a Messiah, the son of Joseph, who was the first Messiah. He has what's called a neshama, which are those 5 parts, and so on, which in many ways are this Mashiach ben Yosef, right? This individual, Mashiach ben Yosef, has a neshama which is called the shirish, or the root soul. Okay? Now, whoever person, in every generation, there is an individual who has this part called the shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef. And it is an aspect of the neshama of Adam Harishon, whatever, that can accept or be the Mashiach ben Yosef if it receives the crown of Adam Harishon called Yechidah. In other words, that, like I mentioned, the Yechidah of Adam Harishon split into two. So there is an aspect of his neshama that is incredibly high, you know, and it is a candidate to receive the Yechid of Adam Harishon. Now, the Yechid of Adam Harishon is the Messianic neshama. So you can have a tremendous lofty neshama called the Shoresh, okay, of what's called Ben Yosef, but it is not the Mashiach. It's a candidate to be the Mashiach. It can receive the Shoresh, the Yechid of Adam Harishon, if the generation is worthy. So it comes out that the individual who will be Mashiach ben Yosef, okay, automatically is a shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef, but he can only be the Mashiach ben Yosef if he receives the crown, the Yechidah of the Adam Harishon, which, as I mentioned, is part. You see. Now, besides that, this individual who will be the Mashiach ben Yosef also will have the neshama of Yosef HaTzadik himself. Yosef HaTzadik himself, his neshama, is the basis of the Mashiach ben Yosef soul in general. It's like a spark, you see. And from that spark of Yosef HaTzadik, that gives rise to sparks, like I say, sparks. And one of the sparks is a shirish. It's very high. It is the root neshama, you see. So you have the neshama of Yosef HaTzadik, which gives rise to the neshama, the Mashiach ben Yosef, becomes the shirish, the root soul of Mashiach ben Yosef. And that can accept what's called the Yechida of Adam Rishon, and he will become the Mashiach ben Yosef. So even though he's a candidate, he must receive the Yechida of Adam Rishon. And in every generation, there is a neshama that's called the Shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef, you see, that can receive in that generation, if the Jewish people are worthy, he can receive the Yechid of Adam Rishon and become the actual Mashiach himself. Now, just like it's true of Mashiach ben Yosef, it's also true of Mashiach ben David. He has the neshama of Yehuda, or David, I should say, which is more accurate, of David HaMelech. He actually has that part of David HaMelech, you see. And that can give rise to, right, the neshama of David HaMelech, that can give rise to a tremendous neshama which is called the Shirish of Mashiach ben David. And that is a candidate, right, if the generation is worthy, to receive the Yechid of Adam Rishon that is given over to the Shirish of Mashiach ben David. You see? So both of these individuals, there will always be somebody in every generation that is a Shirish of Mashiach ben David, right? And Shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef, that if that generation is worthy to have the Mashiach, then they will have also those two candidates, right, that are connected to the Yosef, David HaMelech and Yosef HaTzadik, that can be the actual Mashiach. Now, once they get the Yechida of Adam Rishon and they become the actual Mashiach, remember what that is. That the Yechida of Adam Rishon is the totality of the Yechida of all Jewish people, because that's who Adam was. So in essence, that is why they are so great, because it's like connecting all the Jews to this major part that is connected to the Shekhinah itself. So this basically, when you think about that, is the mechanics of what we're looking at. So in every generation, there's somebody who could be the Mashiach by accepting or receiving, I should say, the Mashiach ben Yosef's, or I should say, the Yechida of Adam Rishon. But the generation has to be worthy to be the generation that will receive the Mashiach. If not, then they will die, and the next generation has somebody else who will be the Shirish. So this basically is what's called the breakdown of the makeup of the two Mashiachim, you know, what they are and what they're composed of, and so on. So this is a very important part that you have to understand, okay, because it's all part of the story, you know, to understand it and so on, you know. Now, the story starts, because it's really an introduction to the greatness of a specific person. There was somebody named Shmuel Elbaz. He was a Talmud, I think of a Talmud of Reb Chaim Vital, who was the greatest Talmud of the Ari. I think that's who he was. And he was a tremendous Makubal. Not much is known about him, but Shmuel Elbaz lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he was a tremendous Makubal, I think of a Talmud of a Talmud of Reb Chaim Vital, and so on, you know. And the story goes that they asked him, because the Yishuv is the community of Eretz Yisrael, at that time, This is about 16 or maybe 1700 and so on. They were very poor. So they would always ask somebody to collect charity for the community itself in order for the community to survive. So they asked him, do us a favor, go to Istanbul. I'm not sure if it was called Constantinople in those days. Probably was. And collect, from Jews who have money to help support the community to survive. So he said, okay. And he was obviously a very distinguished member. He was very great makubal, as we will see. And they asked him to collect charity from this community, perhaps others also, whatever. Anyway, the story is as follows, that he went to, I think, Yaffo, which was is a famous port in those days and so on. And he asked for a ship that's going to Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. And he went over to a person who was the captain of a ship that was going to leave to that city. And he said, I'd like to book passage on your ship to go to, let's say, Constantinople. So the captain said, I'm sorry, but we don't have any room, whatever. We don't have what's called a berth, for you. So I'm sorry, we cannot take you. So Rav Shmuel Elbaz said, okay. And he did a very strange thing, Rav Shmuel Elbaz, to begin to see who this person was. He said, well, how am I going to get to Constantinople? I don't know when the next ship is leaving and so on. So what he did is he went a distance away from the port of Yaffo, and he rolled out a carpet. He had a carpet, and he rolled it out. And what he did is he went on top of the carpet and he sat on it. Imagine, off on the side, quite a distance, maybe a mile away. He sits on top of the carpet and he meditates and he utters what he knew to be a divine name, Hashem. Okay? And all of a sudden, the carpet lifts. It lifts, rises. Imagine that, and it begins to go out into the Mediterranean. And he's sitting on top of this carpet. It's incredible. It's like a magic carpet that you read about, And what he does is he waits, and he waits for the ship that he asks for, passage to begin to embark to Constantinople. And the ship does, and he follows it. Apparently he didn't know how to get to Constantinople. So here's a person, which is incredible. He's sitting on top of a carpet, having uttered a divine name, and he's following the ship to Constantinople. On the way, one of the sailors, is looking out at the sea. They have lookouts and so on, and he's looking around, and he sees this guy on top of a carpet, on top of the Mediterranean Sea. He was like incredulous. So he called the captain over, and the captain took a look, and he sees that it's this Jew that had asked for passage, and he refused. He said, I don't have any room. So he realized this man, he's flying on a magic carpet. You see, so he waves to the person, who happened to be Shmuel Elbaz, please come on board. I mean, he took a look at this. This obviously is not an ordinary person, and so on. So Rav Shmuel Elbaz refused to do that, and he followed the ship for whatever amount of days. I mean, it's not that far away, but obviously it must have been a while. And he follows the ship, and the ship lands in Constantinople. Elbaz takes his carpet and flies all the way to the side and gets off and rolls up the carpet and wants to, very discreetly begin to go into the city. Well, guess what? The story got out. Somehow somebody saw him. It got out, and he was like inundated with requests of blessings and so on, This person, Shmuel Elbaz, then what happened is they began to call him, by this miracle that they witnessed. You know, they called him the master of the carpet, or father of the carpet, whatever, which is in Hebrew is Abuhasira. That is the origin of the name Abuhasira. Right. So he was the first Abuhasira, okay, that had performed this incredible miracle. This is who he was. So you begin to see the origin of this family, and that they are steeped and immersed in Kabbalistic limudim, or traditions and so on. He had a grandson, if I recall correctly. This was his grandson, whose name was Yakov Abuhasira. Famous Yakov Abuhasira, who's known as the Abir Yaakov, okay, the mighty one of Yaakov, and so on. He was a very great man. In fact, they used to call him Yakov Miluban. Yakov Miluban means Yaakov. Miluban means Melumed B'Nisim, trained in miracles. He was a tremendous miracle worker. There are many stories told about him, you know, about the miracles that he performed. In fact, he was so great or famous in the Sephardi lands that they all referred to him, you know, that they said that he was the equivalent of the Baal Shem Tov. In Europe, he was the Baal Shem of the East. Right, that's what they used to call him. That's how great he was, and so on, you know. Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. What is interesting, and he was a tremendous makubal. Like I say, from what I remember, he's the grandson of Shmuel Elbaz, the carpet man, or the magic carpet man, whatever, and so on, you know. So there's an incredible story about this person. Okay, what is that story? He always wanted to go to Eretz Israel, Yakov Abuhasira. And finally, I think it was in 1883, he decided that he's going to move to Eretz Israel. Now, he lived in Morocco. That's where he lived, and so on, you know. And he decided that it's time to fulfill his dream. He was an older person, obviously, and he wanted to move to Eretz Israel. And he therefore left his family, and he obviously intended to go to Eretz Israel and then bring his family over from Morocco and so on. So he's on his way to Eretz Israel. Fine. He gets to the city in Egypt, the city called Damanhur. That is the name of the city. Now Damanhur, is basically a city in Egypt, as I said, and it's 125 miles north of Cairo. Means if you go to Cairo and you go north, you go into what's called the Nile Delta. It's where the Nile River empties into the Mediterranean. So he goes into that city. Now, in that year that he arrived, which was 1883, from what I remember, and so on, there was a Jewish community there. There used to be a lot of Jews in Egypt before they got booted out and all the incredible anti-Semitism in Egypt and so on. I'm not even talking about today. But in 1883, there was apparently a real Jewish community. And he went to Damanhur intending to do what? To travel further to Eretz Israel. In any case, he arrives in Damanhur, but he got very sick. All of a sudden he gets sick. And not only that, but he dies. He dies in Damanhur, never having arrived in Eretz Israel. You know, for whatever reason we don't know, you know, the Moshe did not want him to go to Eretz Israel, as we will see. So he dies in Egypt, Damanhur, in 1883. And the day of his death was Chof Teves, the 20th day of Teves. Okay, that's when he dies. And they bury him in Damanhur, obviously. But this was only temporary, because the people of Morocco wanted him back. They want the tzaddik to be buried, because it brings a tremendous source of blessing to the city that he's buried in. It's This is not simple. So there arose a tremendous din Torah. Din Torah means judgment. You know, where is he going to be buried? Will he be buried in Damanhur, remain there, where he died, and he's buried there temporarily, or will he be taken back to Morocco? So the Psak Din, the decision was that he has to go back to Morocco. Now Morocco obviously is west of Egypt. It's all the way at one end of Africa. Egypt is east of Africa, at the east side, and Morocco is on the west side. And the psak was, like I say, the decision was that he has to be buried, or reburied, I should say, in Morocco. So that's the psak, what he's supposed to do. So what they did is the community went to the gravesite, the cemetery where he was buried, and they undug him, and they began to lift his kever, and so on. Then, as they're lifting him, I mean, Egypt is a country that's, there's not much rain in Egypt, obviously. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a tremendous storm that started really profusely raining. So they couldn't do that. They put him back, and they all ran for cover. That's what they did. Fine, okay. So they waited a couple of days, whatever, until the storm clouds would leave. And after that, so the community went back to the gravesite. Again, it was apparently a beautiful day, right? So they went to the gravesite, again lift him, and return him to Morocco. As they were again lifting him, or undigging him, or whatever, again, out of nowhere, there was a tremendous storm that basically prevented them from taking him out of the ground and beginning to transport him to Morocco. And it was the second time it happened, which was a very unusual occurrence. So they inquired, what should they do? And Bezdin said, it seems that heaven, God, does not want you to move Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira out of his grave in Damanhur. That's what the psak. So what they did, obviously, is they left him there. They reburied him, but this time it was permanent. So here he does, in 1883, he lies in that place, right? And nobody knows why. Why does the Rabbi want him to be buried? He's neither in Morocco, he's certainly not in Eretz Israel, he's in the middle of Egypt, right? And that's where he lies to this day. In any case, nobody understood why, what the meaning of that is. So therefore, what we now have to do is fast forward, okay, to 1942. Remember, 1883 to 1942. What happens? There's a guy, a very great general, German general, Nazi general, Erwin Rommel, always considered one of the greatest generals. Obviously, he was a very brilliant military person. And he is crossing Africa, right, as a Nazi. It was called the African Corps. And he was beating all the British, because the British were trying to stop him. He was crossing North Africa to go to Eretz Israel and basically to kill all the Jews in Eretz Israel and to give Israel as a birthday present to Hitler, right? Which was terrible. I mean, could you imagine if the Nazis had control of Israel? You see? It would be absolutely horrendous, and so on. So there was a Jew, his name, if I recall correctly, is Yitzchak Alfas. And he himself was a makubal of sorts, whatever. I don't know to what extent. And he was taking Jews, minyanim of Jews, and going around to the different places in Eretz Israel, the different Kivri Tzadikim, the graves of holy men, right? And praying that the Rebbe should not allow, right, the Germans, the Nazi, the Wehrmacht, the army, the German army, to capture Israel, because there would be a Holocaust in Israel itself, and so on, besides Europe, and so on. And that's what he was doing, you know. In any case, probably the date is October 21st. October 21st, 1942. He went to sleep, and in the middle of his sleep or whatever, he sees a very vivid dream. And in the dream, there appears to him an old man. And the person says, this person in the dream says to Alphas, why don't you come and get a group of people and pray at my kever, my grave. Apparently it was very vivid, so Alphas asked him, who are you? In the dream. You know, obviously it was a very real dream, and so on. So the person says, my name is Yakov Abuhasira, and I am buried in Damanhur, Egypt. And it was shocking, you see. And he told Alphas, please gather a million of Jews, pray at my grave, which is a very strong remez, illusion. Who knows what the repercussions of this could be? So he gets up in the morning, shocked, and he goes to the Mikabolim that were in Eretz Yisrael in those days, and he says, what's the meaning of the dream? What should I do? So they tell him, if he came to you in a dream, then you must go. Because we don't know the repercussions of what that could mean. Who knows? Maybe he can save Eretz Yisrael. So what did he do? He said, okay. So he decided he's going to go. In those days, there was a train that went from, I think, Yafo, all the way up to Alexandria in Egypt, you see. So he went to there, and he met with the High Commission of the British and told them, I must go to this place in Damanhur, which is basically Alexandria. So the High Commissioner told him, you can't do that, because Alexandria is right next to a battle which was about to begin. That was the front lines. The Battle of El Alamein was about to begin. And El Alamein is west of Alexandria. It's west of Damanhur. It's further toward Morocco. And the battle was about to begin, and that would have been a decisive battle in World War II. And the one who would fight that battle is Montgomery, who was the high command of the British. And he was going to take on Rommel and try to stop the Nazis from taking over Egypt. In fact, Rommel even said, no problem. That's how confident he felt. You know, we're going to have breakfast in El Alamein, we're going to have lunch in Jerusalem, and then we're going to have dinner back in El Alamein. That's how confident he was that they're going to win. In any case, so the guy said, so you can't go to Damanhur, it's right next to the front, where there's going to be a major battle, you know, the war and so on, you know. So he tells them the dream, and the guy said, look, if you want to get yourself killed, because that's where the front battle is, you know, okay. And he let him go. So what happened was that he decided, okay, and he went, therefore, he got on the train to go to, Alexandria, to be mispal in Damanhur at the gravesite of Yakov Abuhasira, because Damanhur was east of El Alamein. It was still east, so you could still go to Damanhur, which is interesting. In any case, so Alfasi, right, went to Yaffa, wherever the train was, and he was late because he davened Vesikin and was late, so he thought he would miss the train. Meanwhile, apparently the train had broken an axle, so it was actually waiting for him which was a very good sign, Min HaShamayim, that they're stopping the train so he can get on it and go to Damanhur, whatever. In any case, he gets on the train, goes to Alexandria, which, like I said, is east of El Alamein. And Alexandria actually is, 30 miles north of Damanhur. In any case, he goes to Alexandria, gets a million of Jews, because there were Jews in 1942 in Egypt. And he goes there, gets a million, and they go to Damanhur. They're able to get there, you see. And the daven at his kever, the Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, all night long. And then Alfas says something very interesting. He said that they davened all night long at his kever. And he said toward dawn, right before it got light, he saw a brilliant light, Ramash, a light, coming from the grave of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. And all of a sudden he said he realized that they were answered, right? That this man, Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, succeeded in stopping the Nazi invasion. Now, the incredible thing, as we will see, is not only did he stop Rommel in his march toward Israel, but this was the turning point of the entire World War II. The Nazis never won a battle after this battle that was about to happen, as I will say, and so on, you know? And because he saw that incredible light and so on. In any case, the next day was October 22nd, 1942, okay? And that was the famous Battle of El Alamein, which is the battle where Montgomery took on Rommel, and he won, which was incredible. And like I just said, the incredible thing about all of this is that this battle was the turning point of World War II. It didn't just stop the Germans from capturing Eretz Yisrael. The Germans never won a battle after that Battle of El Alamein. And then all of a sudden, everybody understood why God made sure that he would die in Damanhur and he could not leave. Why? Because imagine what happens if they would have taken him back to Morocco. Then it comes out that Morocco would be west, right, of Damanhur. And that means Yakov Abuhasira would be buried in Morocco, which is behind enemy lines, which means that these people could never have gotten to the grave of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira and prayed, because you can't, because it's behind the enemy lines. The Germans will have taken over Morocco. So because he died in Damanhur and remained there and not gone back to Morocco, they were able to get to the grave of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. They prayed, and Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira was able to accomplish. What did he accomplish, which was incredible? He stopped the war. He stopped Amalek. He stopped World War II. That's really what he did. Because not only did they lose the battle to take Eretz Yisrael, right? They never won a major battle after that. It was over. It was all downhill. That is considered the turning point of the war. That is incredibly significant because it demonstrates the unbelievable power of this tzaddik, Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. You see, but not only that, I'll tell you something very interesting. October 22nd, 1942, which basically was the next day, right, after they were mispal at the gravesite of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. Do you know what the Hebrew date was? It was Yud Aleph Cheshvan, the yortzeit of Rochel Imeinu. And Rochel Imeinu is part of the neshama of Yosef HaTzadik, because Yosef HaTzadik is the son of Rochel Imeinu, and together, Rochel Imeinu with Yosef HaTzadik, in many ways, is the root neshama, is the neshama that forms the foundational soul of the Mashiach ben Yosef. Right. That's who it was. So it comes out that Rochel Imenu, basically, together with Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, stopped World War II, the Holocaust. That's beyond belief. You have any idea what kind of schus that was? Not only that, I'll tell you something even more interesting. Okay? So that was October 22nd, 1942, was Yud Aleph Cheshvan, the Yortzeit of Rochel Imenu. But the Nuremberg trials started in 1946, if I remember correctly. I think it was October 17th, when Germany would be judged in front of the entire world, the Nuremberg trials, right? That day, or that date I should say, also was Yud Aleph Cheshvan, right? Yud Aleph Cheshvan, the Yortzeit of Rochel Imenu. And not only that, right? So it's not only against the Nazis, but the Berlin Wall, communism, collapsed, if you remember, in 1989. That was when the Berlin Wall collapsed, which is the beginning of the end of communism. If you recall, it collapsed, right? And as a result of that, communism began to dissolve. East Germany, right, began to collapse. It was an entire Ma'apecha, overthrow of communism. That's how it began. And finally, Russia collapsed also, and so on. In any case, so it collapsed, if I remember correctly, on Wednesday, November 9th, 1989. That's when communism, the Berlin Wall, began its collapse. What Hebrew date was that? Yud Aleph Cheshvan. There we go again. The Yortzeit of Rochel Imenu. What do we see? Because the Rochel Imenu, her power is to destroy the enemies of the Jews, right? In fact, because she died, and when she died, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, we know the story, the Medrash, that what? That the Jews, when they were being exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, they passed by, because she died on the way to Beis Lechem. They passed by Moras HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah, and they passed by and they prayed at her grave. And we know the whole Medrash without going into it, that Rochel Imenu, her merit, is what allowed the Jews to return after 70 years. Again, there's a tremendous power that Rochel Imenu has against the enemies of Israel. Enemies of Israel means who? The Nazis, right? Not only that, the communists. And as we will see, another enemy of Israel, which is so remarkable. You see, in any case, this is what happened so far. Now, this is the story so far in 1942, 1946, 1989, and so on, right? Now, for whatever reason, I was reading about these stories which I just said, okay? Stories which I just said, and that is the story of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. And then I realized something while I was reading about this story. What did I realize? I will tell you, I realized, wait a minute, what Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira did, together with Rochel Imenu, but basically, Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira wasn't an ordinary person. The only person who has the power to stop Amalek, World War II, the whole Holocaust, to reverse it and begin its downfall, is only if there was somebody that had the power of Mashiach ben Yosef. Because the main idea of Mashiach ben Yosef is to battle with the enemies of the Jews. In fact, that's what it says. V'hoyu beis Yaakov le'esh, and it will be, Yaakov will be as a fire, right? Beis Yosef lahova, the house of Joseph will be the flame, and therefore Beis Esav, the kash, the house of Esav will be as straw. Yosef has the power to battle Esav and Amalek. You see, so the only way I realized that Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira while I'm reading this, could possibly have that power to stop the Holocaust, right, is if he is himself a shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef. I realize that. That's his koyach, or else he could never have done that. And that's why he appeared to Alphas, come and be mispal. And he was able to do it. You see, he saved Eretz Yisrael and he destroyed the Nazis. And then my story begins, my involvement in this, which is fascinating. And I will tell you what happened as a result. After I read this, or I should say while I'm reading this story, there entered in me an unbelievable obsession. What was the obsession? I had to go to Daman Hor to pray at his kever, right? All of a sudden, I just had this unbelievable obsession, and I could not get rid of it. It would not go away, and it bothered me incessantly. I had to go to Egypt, and this, by the way, when did I read this story? In December of 1994, I had to go to Daman Hor to pray at the kever of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, to go alone, which is incredible. But it was an obsession. It's like you're on drugs and you can't stop it. You have no free will. You realize that. You see, why did I want to go to Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira? Because they were given away, if you recall, Yitzchak Rabin was giving away land to the Arabs, Arafat, and they were calling it sacrifices for peace. He was killing Jews, Arafat, right? And his whole PLO. They were killing Jews left and right. Nobody cared. Well, I should say nobody did anything about it and so on, you know, without getting into the terrible rishus of what these people did, the Rabin and the Zionists and so on, you know. They were willing to give away territory of the Jews, right? Even though what would it gain them and so on, you know? And Jews were being killed by Rabin and so on. I'm not even going into the evil of Rabin, of what he did. He was the one, there was a ship called the Altalena, you know, that was one of the ships, that was a ship of the Exodus and so on, you know, and that he had, they were trying to break the British blockade and get the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, you see, and he ordered the Haganah at those days, you know, to shoot down and kill Jews while they were in the water he sunk the Altalena, and they were trying to get into Israel, and he actually killed Jews. He had the army, or whatever they had in those days, the Haganah, to kill the Jews, whatever year that was, 48 or whatever and so on, 46, whatever and so on, you know. I'm not even going into the sins of Rabin. What he did was terrible. Actually had Jews killed, you know, without getting into the whole politics and so on. But in any case, the main idea, I had this tremendous obsession that I could not remove at all, and so on. Because what I wanted to do is, so what they were doing is they were giving away land, and Jews were dying. So I had the idea, this is obviously what caused the obsession, although the obsession itself was completely abnormal. I never experienced anything like it, you know. So I had this obsession. Why? Because I felt that if he was able to stop the Holocaust, Yakov Abuhasira, then maybe if I go to Daman Hor and actually pray at his gravesite, you see, to stop Rabin. Not that he should be killed, I never thought about that, but maybe the schus of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira could stop the Erev Rav, right, from having Jews killed and giving away the land of Eretz Yisrael, right, to the Arabs and so on. In any case, I was dealing with a tremendous obsession to go to Daman Hor, and here I live in Brooklyn, Flatbush. What am I doing going to, in 1995, what am I doing going to Egypt Damanhur. Now, Damanhur is not a regular Arab city. It's smack in the middle of Egypt. It's all Arabs. It's like going to Ramallah. Not only that, but I was going to go to Damanhur, which is the equivalent of Ramallah, right? I was going to go to Damanhur, right? Like I said, which was the equivalent of Ramallah. It was during Ramadan, which is even worse, you know. And here I look all Jewish. What am I doing in an Arab city like Ramallah? It's in the middle of Ramadan. And to even worse, the Muslim Brotherhood was killing tourists in those days. There was a rebellion going on, and they were actually killing tourists in Egypt. So you had all that going on, and here I'm contemplating going to Damanhur to pray at the gravesite of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. And I realized it was a suicide trip, and I realized that. But I could not stop it. It's like I had no free will at all. So I didn't know what to do. I mean, it was frightening to be compelled to go, to try to be mispalled that he should stop the Erev Rav from having Jews killed, right? From having Jews killed, and not only that, from giving away land of Eretz Yisrael. And I was actually tremendously frightened. So I didn't know what to do. So what I did is I figured I had to, in some way, allay the anxiety, because that's what I was filled with, tremendous anxiety. And this never happened before. So what I did is I thought about it, and so on, and I decided I'm going to call the Egyptian Tourist Bureau. Every country has a tourist bureau, many of them in Manhattan, where you can get information, travel information. So I called up the Egyptian Tourist Bureau to find out, okay, if I fly to Cairo, because that's how you get to Egypt, right? If I fly to Cairo, how am I going to, what's the fastest way to go from Cairo to Damanhur, which is about 125 miles north, and so on? What's the fastest way to get in and get out? So I spoke to the manager of the tourist bureau, the Egyptian Tourist Bureau, and he says to me, where do you want to go in Egypt? I said, I want to go to Damanhur. So all of a sudden he says to me, what do you want to go to Damanhur? What do you want to see? Abuhasira? He said that. So I realized, wait a minute, he knows about it. That Abuhasira, because I had no idea where he's buried now. I think I'm going to have to go to a cemetery and look for this guy smack in the middle of in Ramallah. So I said, yeah, I want to go to his kever. So he said, let me give you advice. Whatever you do, there's a train that goes from Cairo to Damanhur. Don't take the train. It is filled with Arabs. In fact, that's all it has is Arabs. And boy, was he right, because I saw that train. That train has loaded with Arabs, and they're all hanging on to the train and so on, you know. He said, what you do is you take a taxi from Cairo, 125 miles north, and that's how you get there and you get back. Because I wanted to go there and back in one day and get out of Egypt and so on. So I said, thank you very much, and so on, you know. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, the second thing I could do is I don't want to dilly-dally at Cairo airport for a visa. I said, what I'm going to do, let me go to the Egyptian consulate in Manhattan and get a visa to Egypt so I can go in and out of Egypt. So the next thing I did is I went to Manhattan and I went to the Egyptian consulate, and they were all Egyptians, right? And this is 1995, remember. This is basically, you know, the peace agreement, whatever it was flimsy, whatever. So I go into the consulate, and the guy looks at me and says, yes, what can I do for you? Because obviously I'm Jewish. And what am I doing in Egypt? Consulate. So I said, I'd like to go, I want to get a visa to go to the consulate, to go to Damanhur. So he looks at me like, you know, what in the world do you want to go to Damanhur? First of all, Damanhur is not a city that we're talking about, a commercial city like Cairo. It's the middle of nowhere, which it was, and so on, you know. So he said, wait here. So I waited there, and out comes, I think he was the actually consular of the Egyptian consulate and so on. So he tells me to come in, and he sits down and looks at me and says, "Where do you want to go in Egypt?" Like they couldn't understand. You're a Jew. What do you want to do in Damanhur? It's not like you want to go to Cairo as a tourist. This is in the middle of nowhere, you know. So I said, I want to go to Damanhur. So he looks at me and says, "You want to go to Damanhur? Why do you want to go to Damanhur? Like, what does that mean? Do you want to see Abuhasira?" He actually knew. You know, again, he was the second guy that knew about it. So I realized that he's a known individual in Damanhur. I said, yes. So then he asked me, why do people want to go to Damanhur to see Abuhasira? So I told him he's a very great spiritual person. He's a Kabbalist, I told him, that can perform, you know, miracles or whatever. So he looks at me because he had to determine, was he going to give me a visa or not? Was I a security risk? So he thinks about it, and then he says, okay, I'll give you a visa. So he gave me a visa to go to Damanhur. He probably thought I was out of my mind because, like I said, it was Ramadan, right? And they were killing tourists. And you want to go in the middle of Egypt. Remember, this is not Cairo, which is a tourist place. This is in the middle of like going to Ramallah, you see. Anyway, he gave me the visa, fine. So the next thing I did, so my anxiety was slightly abated, slightly, not much, because it was incredibly dangerous doing what I was doing. Yet the obsession was such that I could not stop it. In any case, so I went to Israel, right? And then I took Air Sinai to Cairo. I actually flew to Cairo myself, all myself, looking obviously very Jewish, and I landed in Cairo. Fine. I had a visa, which was a very good idea, so I went right through the immigration and so on, and I walked outside, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by 30 Arabs, and they were all screaming at me, "Taxi, taxi!" They're all taxi drivers, and Egypt was doing terrible because tourists were not coming because they were killing tourists, you see. And here a guy comes out, maybe some kind of money and so on. So they're all screaming at me, "Taxi, taxi," 30 of them, you know. So all of a sudden somebody screams out and says in broken English, "Where do you want to go?" Because they knew I was an American. "Where do you want to go?" So I said, "I want to go to Damanhur." So one of them screams out, "Abuhasira." They knew. You know, why else would anybody go to this backward town called Damanhur? In any case, so I didn't know who to pick. You got 30 guys all screaming at you, "Taxi, taxi." So finally there was a guy that looked pretty decent. He spoke broken English. So he tells me I have a van, a 9-seater van, and it's me and the driver. I'm the tourist guide, and he's the driver. I'd love to take you. So I figured the guy speaks somewhat English, and I had a 9-seater van all to myself. So we get on the highway, and we're on our way 125 miles to go in the middle of Egypt, you know. And like I was saying, you know, and I'm tremendously uptight because I am literally in a Makom Sakana. But I had to do it. I had no choice, and so on. Anyway, I get to Damanhur, and my driver asked one of the Arabs, "You had to see the city." Half the city rode around on donkeys, and the other half had cars. I mean, and the city was mostly sand. It's really primitive when you really look at it and so on. Anyway, he asked where the cemetery was, and we go to the cemetery, and I see the house. He's buried in a house, you know. And what was interesting, in front of that house was 3 Egyptian guards with machine guns guarding the kever of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. This was very, very interesting. You see, so we get out of the car, and we tell them, I want to go in to pray at his grave and so on, you know, and they all look at me and say, "I'm sorry, you cannot come in here." And it was about 3:30 p.m. "You can't come in here. You need a permit by the police to come in, because obviously they were there to guard it, And then, fine. So we have to jump back in the car, go back in the city of Damanhur. I'm telling you, you can't believe what it is when you're in the middle of people that probably would like to slit your throat. It was just incredible, And we go to the police station, right? And I sit down, and they're all, I'm telling you, it's like they're all Arabs all around me. We're not talking here about some Israelis or somebody who knows English and so on, I'm in the middle, literally, of like Ramallah. And all of a sudden, after 5 minutes of sitting, the guy comes out, and he's a police commissioner of Damanhur. He's the commissioner, He says, okay, everybody, come with me. So we go back to the van, jump in the van, me, my driver, and the licensed tour guide, and the police commissioner. And we head back to the kever, the house, So we get out, and of course, he's a police commissioner. So the guards, the three guys with machine guns, they move aside, and I go into the building, and there he is. Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, the kever, is in front of me. So I motion for them, please, I want to pray. So do me a favor, please exit, all of you. I can't pray with you guys hanging around. So they did that. They left the building. They left me in the building alone, And I was being mispalel, And like I say, the reason why I went, basically, was for some reason I knew that this man is a shurish of the Mashiach ben Yosef, and he was able to stop the Holocaust. You cannot imagine the schus or the kedusha of this man to be able to do that type of spiritual task. It's beyond belief. Remember, we're talking about the Holocaust now. We're not talking about the life of a Jew. We're talking about the stopping of the killing of Jews. El Alamein was the end of the Nazi ability in 1942. In any case, I'm being spalled there, which is very fascinating, And what is interesting is when I was, so a half hour passed, and all of a sudden, and the kever closes at 4 o'clock. So I remember I looked, this is just an aside, but it's very interesting. It just shows you the power of this tzaddik. So I turned to Abuhasira, and after being mispal, Tillim, and all that, and so on, I said to him, look, I came here in a tremendous sakana, and it is. And we're looking at Ramadan, they're killing tourists. This is the middle of Ramallah, right? It's suicide, that's really what it is. It's only by a nest that nothing happened. And you see there are even more nisim, as I will say, and so on, I said, do me a favor, in that schus, I don't even know why I thought about it, but I had this afterthought. I said, I've been looking to buy an apartment in Eretz Israel for 25 years, and nothing has ever happened. Anytime there's a possibility, it falls through. I said, please, in the merit of what I did, to come to be mispal, not on my behalf, but on the behalf of Klal Yisrael, get me an apartment. That's what I said to Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, almost like an afterthought, because I certainly I didn't have that b'kavanah. Anyway, so all of a sudden they all entered, because it was 4 o'clock, and they closed the place at 4 o'clock, And what was funny, they were all, the 3 guys with the machine guns, the police commissioner, they're just standing there, not saying anything. So I was asking myself, like, what in the world are they doing? And then I realized, they want bribes. They want bakshish. And I realized that's why the police commissioner came, because he wants American dollars and so on, So when I realized that, I take out, I remember, I think it was 75 Egyptian pounds, which is, I think is about 2 weeks' salary, which is a lot of money. It was 75 Egyptian pounds. I think it was like $10, something like that, So I take the money out of my pocket and I give it to the police commissioner. And he looks at me and says, no, I don't want this. Because he couldn't take it in front of those guys. It's an open bribe, So I understood, and I took the money and I gave it to one of the guys with the machine guns, with the commissioner looking on. So he saw that I was giving it to this guy. I said, okay, you guys, you know what to do, after I left. In any case, I walked outside, and then I realized something. I had a what's called an epiphany. In front of me, in front of the house, the whole place was filled with mud. The whole place was filled with mud, and the part of the Nile tributary ran through Damanhur, and it was all mud. So I said to myself, what in the world is Abuhasira lying in his klipa, this tumah, this makom tumah, this tzaddik lying in this? And then I said, of course, this is Yosef in Mitzrayim. What is Yosef HaTzadik doing in the Nile River? Because that's where he was, And the answer is because the Satan has permission to take from the Kedusha of a tzaddik, depending on the sins of the Jewish people. That's part of the dinam, the judgments that we unfortunately have to give up when we sin, that he can actually take from the Kedusha, the holiness, right, of these people, and so on, And I realized, it even furthered my understanding. Yakov Abuhasira, who I now understand fully, that he represents Klal Yisrael, that has to be in the klipa, right? And which aspect of Klal Yisrael? Which aspect of the klipa? Egypt, the old-fashioned Egypt. Why? Because he is a shirish, a root soul of the Mashiach ben Yosef. Just like Yosef had to lie in the Nile, Yakov Abuhasira, literally lies in the Nile, literally. And I'm looking at the Nile, a tributary of the Nile River. Same concept, you see? So that even more further reinforced the concept that what I did was correct. In any case, and then we jumped back into the van, and I was very nervous because when the police commissioner jumped into the van coming to Abuhasira, he took all our passports. I had to give my passport, the driver had to give a passport, and the tour guide. I said, imagine, and I had no passport. How do you get out of Egypt? You don't. But fortunately, on the way back to the police station, right, it gave me back my passport, and so on. So it was incredible, And then we're on our way home. It's a 3-hour drive to go from Damanhur, right, back to Cairo, and so on. But in any case, we're on our way back to Cairo. And then my licensed tour guide turns around to me and says, and this is where I realized the Hashkafa, tremendous Hashkafa of what the Mashiach did for me, and so on, He looks at me and says, you're a very lucky man. I said, really? Why? I mean, I'm lucky to be alive. You go into a den of lions and you walk out having done what you were supposed to do. And like I say, we're looking at a tremendous sakana. I used to go into Ramallah during Ramadan, and they're all killing tourists. Anyway, so I asked him why. He says, I want to tell you something. Really, we arrived at 3:30, and you couldn't go in there. None of us could really go in there unless we had permission from the police. The problem is that it takes time for the police to give you a permit. It takes at least an hour. So that means he would have given us the permission at 4:30, but the place closes at 4 o'clock. So they would have locked up the place. And in order for me to come to this place, I would have to go to Alexandria, which is about 40 miles north, sleep over, and then come back the next day, which was Friday, right? And I would have missed my plane, and I'm not going to spend an overnight in 1995 in Egypt and so on, you see? And so you would never have gotten in. I would have to be mispal outside the building, which is terrible. You're not looking at the keva, you're outside some building. So I asked him, wait a minute, so then how did I get the permit? Because I got it in 5 minutes, not an hour, you see? So he says, I'll tell you something, I don't really know. I do know this, right, is that for some reason we arrived at 3:30. He said, at 2 o'clock, he said, apparently there was a group of people, he has no idea who they were, that they came to Abuhasira. Now, it didn't make any sense. Who would they be? Because it wasn't his yortzeit. So who? There's no Jews in Egypt and Damanhur. And so on. I have no idea. But what the police commissioner did is he took their permit and he gave it to me. So that's why it was ready in 5 minutes. So I said, that was incredible. I'm talking about mazel, and that's why I was able to get in, So I said, if that's the case, then I began questioning or thinking about that ness. I said, well, why didn't Hashem allow me to come earlier, right? And I would get into the place when they were there. So I said, because the Hashem wanted me to mispal alone, so I would have kavana and not be bothered by the tefillah of 5, 10 guys, whatever. So that's what the guy said. I realized, what a mazel. This is Damanhur in the middle of nowhere. It's not his yortzeit. And there are no Jews in Damanhur. Like, who are they that they would have come here? And then he tells me a second thing, which is even more fascinating. He says to me, you should know also one thing. There were 30 guys, taxi drivers, that all wanted to take you to Damanhur. And they're taxi drivers. They could have done that. He said the problem was none of them are licensed. They're all hack drivers. That's right, just trying to earn $1 or whatever. And so, you're lucky that you picked me. I was basically the only guy with a license. So because of that, I had the legal right to take you into Abuhasira. None of them would have been able to do that. The police commissioner would have said, I'm sorry, you can't go in because these guys are not even licensed to take you here. You see? So forget about it. But I'm licensed, so I'm allowed to do that. So you picked the right guy out of the 30 taxi drivers. You picked the right person to take you in. I was shocked. I mean, what are the odds that you picked the right guy to get into that? And of course, I saw all of this as the tremendous Hashkafa pratis and so on, In any case, so then we went back. It took another 3 hours to get back, and the roads were empty because everybody was home eating. It was Ramadan, so there was nobody on the road, and so on, But I had a chaperayim, I have to be honest. I had a chaperayim, and I realized I had called before that there's a sound and light show, right, in what do you call it, in Giza, the pyramids, in English that night at 7 o'clock. So I realized that we had time because my flight was only at 1 o'clock in the morning, a.m. So I told these guys, do me a favor, don't take me back to Cairo because I still have about 5-6 hours to go to get the plane, El Al, back to Tel Aviv. I said, take me to Giza, the pyramids, right? Because I wanted to see the sound and light show, which he did. He was a little nervous because he didn't know if I would pay him. I said, don't worry, I will pay you. And I paid him very nicely for what he did and so on, Anyway, I was able to see the sound and light show and so on. And I had certain Hashkafa revelations watching the sound and light show in Hashkafa. But the main idea is we went back and the anxiety left. And to this day, I've never experienced an iota of that obsession ever again. It's 30 years since that happened, so on and so forth, And this was my personal autobiographical, material of me and Yakov Abuhasira. Now you can ask, well, what were the repercussions? I'll tell you something interesting. 7 or 8 months later, right, Rabbi was assassinated. Now, not that I wanted him to die. That's not in any way. That was not my intent and so on. I just wanted his schus to stop Rabin and the Erev Rav from destroying Eretz Yisrael, from giving back the land of Israel. I wanted him to stop, So it was amazing and I was shocked. I think it was November 5th, right, in 1995, that Yitzchak Rabin was assassinated. And what was shocking about that is that the Hebrew date of when he died was Yud Aleph Cheshvan, was Rochel Imeinu's Yotzeit. It was astounding that that's when he died. Again, there they are. Rachel Imenu, the one who fights for Klal Yisrael, who protects the Jewish people, and she stopped Rabin, the head of the Erev Rav. It's astounding when you think about that. Now, was it because of my tefillah? I don't really know. But what happened was, how many people are assassinated, and that it should be on the yacht side of Rachel Imenu itself is incredible. Now, what does all this have to do with current events? And here's the shocker, okay? What do we see? What motivated me, I never had anything like that, even remotely so, this obsession, and I could not stop it. It was abnormal, completely. You know, you have to remember I'm a psychotherapist, so I'm familiar with obsessions and so on, you know. It entered me, and it left only after I left Egypt, never to come back again, that I had to go and be mispal at the kever. What is so fascinating is because I realized that Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira has to be, like I said, a Shiur of Mashiach ben Yosef. He's the one who stopped, and that's why he died on the 20th day of Teves. Why? In order for the Jews to have access to his kever, and Alfas saw the light coming out, and he stopped single-handedly with Rachel Imenu and so on to stop the Holocaust. And we have no idea what power does it take to stop the Holocaust. When you think about the gzeira of the Holocaust, how in the world did he stop it? Because we have no idea really of who he was. But I realized that, and that's the origins, clearly, of my obsession. So we see, therefore, that we have two powerful forces to stop the enemies of the Jews. The enemy that he stopped was Amalek, Nazi Germany. There's no question. And then, like I mentioned, the Berlin Wall collapsed, which is the beginning of the end of communism, on Yud Aleph Cheshvan. There she is, Rachel Imenu. Apparently, those are the two major forces, Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, the Shiur of Mashiach ben Yosef, and Rachel Imenu. Now, why do I bring this up? Guess what? Who's the next force that's the enemy of the Jews? Really the enemies is what I've been saying for years, is the Rash Be'esav. Esav is terrible to the Jewish people. And in America, you know, and I've been saying this for years, the enemy of the Jewish people, the Rash Be'esav, is the Democratic Party, you see. Now, what is amazing is they're about to collapse. The Democratic Party has been devastated by Donald Trump, which is incredible. So you begin to think, wait a minute, who has protected the Jews from the enemy of the Jewish people? The Democratic Party. You see? Who? Well, it's interesting when you think about it. The Hebrew date of the inauguration of Donald Trump, which is January 20th, right? January 20th, 2025, is Chof Teves, the 20th day of Teves. That is the yortzeit of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. And we know he died on that day, right? Just like Rachel Imenu. She died on the date that had to be there so the Jews could pray at her kever and stop, the exile, the Babylonian exile. Could you imagine? The Democratic Party is about to die on the date of January, 20th, which is Chof Teves. That's the yortzeit of Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira. You see? So imagine Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira has to die on January 20th now, but then was Chof Teves, in 1883. So on that inauguration day, who will die? That's the end of Obama. You don't realize. It's the end of his power. Him, Biden, Harris, Schumer, all of these people who are terrible. Either the Rash Be'esav, or the terrible, not just the Rosh Besav, but the Erev Rav, Schumer is Erev Rav, and so on, on his Yortzeit. There he is again. Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira is the inauguration day of the demise, basically, of the Democratic Party. Because what's going to happen is Trump is going to do things which are incredible, which American history has never seen before. He's going to revamp America. And that is the day that the Democratic Party will, in many ways, not disappear, but they will be eviscerated, denuded, whatever term you wanted to use, and so on, made impotent, and so on, with Donald Trump. And we all know that. And amazingly so, again it happens on the date that he had to die, which is Chof Teves, Rabbi Yakov Abuhasira, to save the Jewish people. So just like he had to die on that date to make sure that he was available for Jews from Israel to pray at his kever, so he would be east of El Alamein. That date is also the date that Trump would come in and eviscerate the Democratic Party. And we see what's going to happen and so on, And that's the purpose, really, of my telling you this story and so on. So it's obviously a fascinating story. It shows you, that there are things that go on that we have no idea of what's really happening. It is the mysteries of the cosmos. It is the mysteries of God's plan of how he saves the world. And it's so subtle. It's dates. How many people realize, that the inauguration day of Donald Trump, and therefore the demise in many ways of the Democratic Party, is on the very Yortzeit of the person that saved the Jews in the Holocaust. We're talking here about what? We're talking about the Shurish, the root soul of Mashiach ben Yosef. How many people realize that? Yet it's something which happens subtly, very cautiously, very subtly. I was able to recognize it. Why? Because of my involvement autobiographically in 1995. And even that is an unbelievable mystery. And the miracles that happened to me in order for me to be able to get to Damanhur, and I'll never forget that experience, to go into the lion's mouth, to the den, like Doniel, and to sit with the lions, right, and walk out, untouched and so on, So it's something to realize, very important. We are close to the end. This is not normal, I hope that you appreciate, the unbelievable subtlety of how the Rebbe runs the world. And it's only later on that we will realize what the Rebbe has done for us to save us, and so on. So hopefully and I will talk about this in whatever the next year, about the significance of what's happening now with Donald Trump and so on, because there are miracles happening that are miraculous that nobody seems to realize. Nobody understands, that the Russian basically saved the America, and they don't even understand how and why and so on. In any case, I thought you would enjoy this story, mystical story of how the Jews were saved in the Holocaust by the individual who himself really is a shirish of the Mashiach ben Yosef. And I hope you enjoyed the story of his grandfather, Elbaz, Shmuel Elbaz, with the magic carp and so on. Thank you.